We now come to the urgent question. If members can leave quietly, I want to call the Leader of the SNP, Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To ask the Prime Minister to make a statement on the decision of the Supreme Court and the rights of the Scottish Parliament to call for an independence referendum.
No. Mr. Speaker, I'm grateful to the Right Honourable Member for providing me with the opportunity to address the House on this important ruling of the Supreme Court on the issue of the competence of the Scottish Parliament to legislate for a referendum on independence. The UK Supreme Court has today determined that it is outside the powers of the Scottish Parliament to hold an independence referendum. And I respect the Court's clear and definitive ruling on this matter. The Scottish Government's Lord Advocate referred this question to the Supreme Court, which has today given its judgment. And, Mr. Speaker, the UK Government's position has always been clear that it would be outside the Scottish Parliament's competence to legislate for a referendum on Scottish independence because it is a matter wholly reserved to the United Kingdom Parliament. We welcome the Court's unanimous and unequivocal ruling, which supports the United Kingdom's Government's long-standing position on this matter. People want to see the Scottish Parliament and the Scottish Government focus on issues that matter to them, not on constitutional division. People across Scotland rightly want and expect to see both their governments and the United Kingdom and the Scottish Government working together with the relentless focus on the issues that matter to them, their families and their communities. The Prime Minister has been very clear and has demonstrated since day one that it is our duty to work constructively with the Scottish Government. We fully respect the devolution settlement and we want to work together with the Scottish Government on vital areas like tackling the cost of living, growing our economy and leading the international response to Russia's illegal war in Ukraine. At this time of unprecedented challenges, the benefits of being part of the United Kingdom have never been more apparent. Never been more apparent. Mr. Speaker, the United Kingdom Government is providing the Scottish Government with a record block grant settlement of £41 billion per year over the next 3 years. And the people in Scotland are benefiting from unprecedented cost of living support announced by this Prime Minister and our Chancellor. It is important now that we move on from constitutional issues to focus on tackling our shared challenges. I therefore welcome the Supreme Court judgment and I call on the Scottish Government to set aside these divisive constitutional issues so that we can work together, focusing all of our attention and resources on the key issues that matter to the people of Scotland. Mr. Speaker, the United Kingdom Government is proud of its role as the custodian of the devolution settlement. The United Kingdom is one of the most successful political and economic unions in the world. By promoting and protecting its combined strengths, we are building on hundreds of years of partnership and shared history. And, Mr. Speaker, I'd conclude by saying that when we work together as one United Kingdom, we are safer, stronger and more prosperous.
Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for granting this urgent question. It is right that the UK Government answers questions today and answers them quickly, because this morning the Supreme Court dealt with a question of law. There is now a massive question of democracy.
Hear, hear.
Some of the Westminster parties are already widely celebrating this morning's decision, but I think it's safe to say that their thoughtless triumphalism won't last very long. Because this judgment raises profound and deeply uncomfortable questions about the basis of the future of the United Kingdom. The biggest question of all is how the Prime Minister can ever again repeat the myth that the United Kingdom is a voluntary union of nations. In 2014, the Smith Commission made it clear that, and I quote, "Nothing in its report prevented Scotland becoming an independent country should the people of Scotland so choose." If that is true, if his government is still committed to that promise, will he urgently amend the Scotland Act to ensure that the Scottish people have the right to choose our own future? If he fails to do that, is he deliberately choosing to deny democracy? Because a so-called partnership in which one partner is denied the right to choose a different future, or even itself to ask the question, cannot be described in any way as a voluntary or even a partnership at all. Mr Speaker, what today's decision does is cast focus on the democratic decisions of the Scottish people. Since 2014, the SNP has won 8 elections in a row. We have secured multiple mandates. The question is, how many times do people in Scotland have to vote for a referendum before they get it? The more contempt the Westminster establishment shows for Scottish democracy, the more certain it is that Scotland will vote yes when the choice does come to be made.
Absolutely.
Because Scotland didn't vote for Brexit. We didn't vote for a new age of Tory austerity. We didn't vote for this Prime Minister. And we haven't voted for the Tories in Scotland since 1955. What we did vote for was the choice of a different future. If Westminster keeps blocking our democratic decisions, lawfully and democratically, Scotland will find a way out of this union.
Mr Speaker, I would raise a couple of points to the Honourable. This idea that there was a mandate delivered in 2021 in the holiday elections is completely misleading. As the First Minister herself said in an interview in the Herald, that parties, and this is when she thought that the former First Minister, their leader, previous leader Alex Salmond, was gaming the system with his party Alba. She very clearly said that parties should stand on both the list and first past the post constituency system, and the Greens did not fulfil that. Neither did Alba. So let's be clear: in the 22 Holyrood elections, the so-called mandate, less than 1/3 of the Scottish electorate voted for the SNP.
Shadow Secretary of State for Scotland, Ian Murray.
Very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I begin by thanking the Supreme Court for examining this case in detail, for reaching an unanimous decision and for doing so in a speedy manner. I also want to thank the Scottish Lord Advocate for referring this case to the Supreme Court. She was right not to allow it to be lodged in the Scottish Parliament before seeking legal clarity on this matter, and we are all in a better place now for that clarity having been put forward. The Supreme Court's ruling is absolutely clear and concise. The leader of the SNP has just accused those who are against independence of triumphalism today. Nothing could be further from the truth. We are deeply disappointed and angry that our politics in Scotland is paralysed by this constitutional grievance. It's now time for all of us in Scottish politics to focus on the problems facing our country, from rocketing bills to the crisis in our NHS. And I wish they had such passion for doing that. I fear that won't happen after the First Minister has announced that she will turn the next general election into a de facto referendum. As an example, Madam Deputy Speaker, the SNP have made such a mess of our NHS that earlier this week, NHS chiefs have been discussing plans to privatise our health service. Labour, and perhaps our country's greatest achievement. There is not a majority in Scotland for a referendum or for independence, but neither is the majority for the status quo. There is a majority in Scotland and across the UK for change. This failing and incapable Tory government is unfit to govern this country. They've crashed the economy, and they are as big a threat to the Union than any nationalist. People in Scotland and across the UK are sick of watching their incompetence, our national standing falling in the world, and working people paying for their decisions. But change is coming. It's coming with a UK Labour government that will bring economic growth, raise living standards, and restore our nation's place in the world. So does the Secretary of State agree with me that change is indeed coming, and Scottish voters will lead the way by kicking his government out of office and helping to elect a UK Labour government?
Madam Deputy Speaker, no, I don't agree with him on his last point.
David Mandel.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. My constituents, Madam Deputy Speaker, won't be celebrating this outcome, but they will be deeply relieved that they are not going to be facing a hugely divisive independence referendum next October with all the other issues that they face. In my constituency, people cannot access an NHS dentist. They cannot access a GP. They can hardly get an ambulance to come out, and our local hospital was overwhelmed 2 weeks ago. On that basis, does my right honourable friend agree with me that this is the time to move on and focus on the issues that really matter to our constituents in Scotland?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, my right honourable friend is absolutely right, and I know he's put a lot of work in on this subject in the past. The Scottish Government must focus on the people's priorities. Public services in Scotland are falling behind and failing in many areas, and it is important that we now stop constitutional wrangling and focus on what the people's priorities are. That's what they want us to do.
Kirsten Oswald.
Madam Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, democracy denial is not a good look. No. We've had repeated non-answers, we've had repeated assertions from the Tory benches today that they somehow know better than the people of Scotland what they want. And now we've had an extraordinary suggestion from the Secretary of State that we somehow don't have a mandate. None of these things are correct. None of these things deal with the crux of this issue, which is a fundamental issue of democracy and whether this really is a voluntary union. Is the Secretary of State going to stand up for democracy or not?
I do stand up for democracy. As I said, in the Holyrood elections last year, less than a third of Scots voted for the Scottish National Party, and in current polling shows that less than a third of Scots want another independence referendum.
Ian Stewart.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Now that we have clarity from the Supreme Court, can I urge my right honourable friend to redouble his efforts to work with the Scottish Government and with local authorities in Scotland to deliver on the issues that matter to people. My experience as 2 years in the Scotland office is that there is that appetite to work together on welfare, where there's shared responsibility, on the city deals and many other issues. That's what we should be focusing on, not more divisive referendums.
My honourable friend is absolutely right. It's not just what's in front of us, but what's behind us. The furlough scheme, which supported 900,000 jobs during the pandemic. The £1.5 billion of Barnett support that was announced by the Chancellor in his autumn statement. And the things in front of us, not just the growth deals, but free ports and the forthcoming cost of living support.
Pete Wishart.
Speaker, this ruling is bad for them, and I don't think they actually quite see this yet. What this ruling does is to confirm to the Scottish people that there's no legal or democratic route to a referendum, and all it will do will be infuriate the Scottish people and make sure that they have their demands for Scottish democracy in place. What we've not had is the how. How do we now get to a referendum if the legal and democratic means are closed? The Prime Minister was asked, he's now been asked, will he now please answer?
Yes, Madam Deputy Speaker, I will answer very simply. In 2014, there was a consensus between both governments, all political parties and Civic Scotland. Those are not the circumstances today.
Sir Bernard Jenkins.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. May I just point out to my right honourable friend that it was in fact the United Kingdom Parliament that gave Scotland a referendum in 2014. Oh yes. And then does he recall that the SNP then said this was a once-in-a-generation decision? Has he ever known a generation pass so quickly in just 8 years? And could it be that the SNP actually prefer campaigning for a referendum they cannot have because they want to distract attention from the failures of the Scottish Government on schools, on health, on procurement of ferries and on many, many other issues?
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right, and he only makes points that many of the commentariat make in the Scottish media.
Alistair Carmichael.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The judgment today puts the point beyond any measure of doubt, and I think that is to be welcomed. I also welcome the announcement from the Scottish Government that they will respect the judgment of the Court, because for governments to respect the rule of law is very important. We shall hold them to that commitment in the future. Will the Secretary of State, however, give me an assurance that in demanding respect for the rule of law from others, the government of which he will be his part will do the same thing going forward?
Yes.
David Duckett.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I too welcome the unanimous ruling by the Supreme Court today and respect that judgment, as I believe everyone else in the House have already said they share. Would my right honourable friend agree? He already has pointed out the current polling, the results of past elections not showing a majority of voters in Scotland favouring independence supporting parties. Does he agree that democratic mandate has not? There is no evidence that has changed since 2014.
Yes, my honourable friend is absolutely right. The majority of voters in Scotland vote for parties that support the Union.
Joanna Cherry.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the United Kingdom Supreme Court have answered a legal question this morning, not a political one. And the lesson of history is that a nation's exercise of its right to self-determination can be delayed but not denied. So, can the Right Honourable Gentleman answer the question that the Prime Minister could not or would not answer? And it's this. If people living in Scotland continue to elect a majority of pro-independence MSPs and MPs who support a second independence referendum, what is the democratic route to realising that mandate?
Well, as I've pointed out before, it is not the case that a majority of the Scottish electorate have voted for independent supporting parties.
Alan Cairns.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome today's the clarity that today's judgment has been provided by the Supreme Court. But does my right honourable friend agree with me and share my concern that the constant political wrangling and doubts over Scotland's constitutional status and the capacity of holding a referendum and the prospect of holding a referendum will constantly undermine Scotland's attractiveness to private investors, that will create jobs, create wealth and prosperity that people in Scotland rightly deserve?
Yes, I mean, as a businessman before I came into this place, I agree with my honourable friend. It is unattractive to investors when there is uncertainty and a cloud hanging over Scotland on this matter. Far better the Scottish Government put it behind them now. The ruling is very clear, and we move forward to building the Scottish economy for the benefit of all the people in Scotland.
Stephen Flynn.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. We sit here in this House knowing that Scottish politicians will only ever make up a fraction of the seats. We have a UK government that the people of Scotland didn't vote for, indeed a UK Prime Minister that nobody has voted for. So, bearing all that in mind, can I ask Westminster's man in Scotland to name just one scenario under which he would agree to the people of Scotland being able to determine their own democratic future?
Well, as I've said in my answers before, the route to a referendum is when there's consensus between governments, across political parties and across Civic Scotland, as there was in 2014. That is not the case now. Now, the UK government wants to focus on the Scottish economy, on creating free ports, on supporting people in the cost of living and getting on with the day job, which is what I think the Scottish Government should do.
Richard Graham.
Madam Deputy Speaker, as someone of Scottish descent, can I just say that there are many of us living in the United Kingdom across the 4 separate territories who have an enormous fondness and love for Scotland. And when I have been visiting Scotland, for example, to the European Marine Energy Centre in Orkney, which I noticed, by the way, that the leader of the SNP here in Westminster has never visited himself, or whether I'm visiting Nova outside Edinburgh or the Rosyth shipyards, this is to support great businesses based in Scotland doing exciting things which the United Kingdom can promote abroad for the benefit of all of us, and surely that is the most important thing that all of us today could focus on.
My honourable friend makes a very good point, and to his initial remarks, we are a family of nations and we are a nation of families.
Marion Fellows.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm a bit puzzled. Why does this government which doesn't have a mandate in Scotland, continue to refuse the right for the Scottish people to hold a referendum as things have changed enormously since 2014?
Madam Deputy Speaker, because this government believes that the Scottish people's priorities are to see the two governments working together in a collaborative and constructive partnership.
Jerome Mayhew.
Speaker, the SNP mistake their obsession with independence as the obsession of the people of Scotland. But we've already heard that's simply not the case. Yeah. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that rather than going down this rabbit hole of creating a constitutional crisis, as we've heard, we should all of our constituents, north and south of the border, want us to focus on making our public services work? Yeah. And that is an area where the SNP conspicuously fail.
My honourable friend makes a very, very salient point, and he's absolutely right. The Scottish people want to see good public services delivered to them by the Scottish Government that is focused on the things that were devolved to Holyrood.
Ms Savile Roberts.
The Trevelyan vote in 1957 taught people in Wales that Welsh MPs can always be overridden by the structural tyranny of the majority here in Westminster. The First Minister of Wales, himself a unionist, is on record saying that the UK can only be sustained, and I quote, as a voluntary association of four nations in which we choose to pool our sovereignty for common purpose and for common benefits. Given that the Labour front bench has parroted the same lines as the Tories this afternoon, will he write to the First Minister of Wales to confirm whether we are voluntary partners in this union or involuntary inmates?
No, I won't be writing to the First Minister of Wales. I'll leave that to the Secretary of State for Wales or anyone else who feels that that's in their remit. And I just say to the Honourable Lady, polling shows that less than a third of Scots want another independence referendum.
Gavin Newland.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. The smug, patronising and cloth-eared response by the Prime Minister, the so-called Secretary of State for Scotland and the Tory benches to the democratic human rights of Scots being ripped away from them will be seen by many Scots today. Could you, Madam Deputy Speaker, could you imagine the uproar if the European Parliament, with European courts, had denied this Parliament the right to legislate on the Brexit referendum? Or simply unable to answer to the same question to the Chair of the Scottish Affairs Committee. So how does any member country of this so-called voluntary union leave?
Well, I don't know if he's, I don't know if he's read the Supreme Court judgment, but it makes it very clear the matter is reserved to the Westminster Parliament, and it is very clear that this mandate argument, less than a third of Scots voted for the SNP, of the electorate voted for the SNP last year. We're very clear about that, and we're very clear that a future referendum would be, as in 2014, when there's consensus, I am answering it, a consensus between both governments, all political parties and Civic Scotland.
The honourable gentleman just can't sit there yelling. It's a really bad look. Amy Callaghan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I asked the Secretary of State the same question that I asked the Prime Minister just a short while ago, which I'm still waiting on an answer to, which is what's the route for a nation to leave this so-called voluntary union? He's answered 3 times now about the majority of votes, so would they respect the result of a general election acting as a de facto referendum?
Madam Deputy Speaker, general elections are when people expect parties to come forward with a manifesto of the issues that face Scotland and face the United Kingdom. That's what general elections are for.
Colin Eastwood.
The former Member of Parliament for Cork City once said, "No man has the right to fix a boundary to the march of a nation. No man has the right to say to his country, thus far shalt thou go and no further." Of course, we don't have a member of this Parliament anymore for Cork City because Charles Stewart Parnell was right. This United Kingdom is clearly not a partnership of equals. That has been made absolutely clear today. So when will this government publish clear criteria for how the people of the north of Ireland can leave this United Kingdom?
Well, I suggest the honourable gentleman ask that question in Northern Ireland questions.
Drew Hendry.
Deputy Speaker, can the Secretary of State confirm that this, in his view, that this is a voluntary union? And if so, if the answer is yes, what is the mechanism in future for the Scottish people to be able to have their choice about whether they remain within it?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, I feel I've answered that question many times already, so I'm just going to refer the honourable gentleman to the answer I gave earlier.
Deirdre Brock.
Deputy Speaker, things have changed dramatically since 2014, and I would remind the Shadow Secretary of State for Scotland that in 2019 he said a democracy fails to be a democracy if the public aren't allowed to change their mind. Now, back in 2012, Alistair Darling stated, "Today we are equal partners in the United Kingdom." Today, our First Minister noted this ruling confirms that the notion of the UK as a voluntary partnership is no longer, if it ever was, a reality. Why won't the Secretary of State acknowledge the only way for Scotland to be treated as an equal is with its independence?
Secretary of State.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I've made it very clear what my position is, and I refer the honourable lady to the answer I gave earlier.
Chris Stevens.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. So we have a Secretary of State for Scotland who can go to the unelected House of Lords at a time of his choosing, setting democratic chess on how Scotland can choose its own future. It's fanciful and absurd. But if the Secretary of State is so confident in his view of what the priorities are for the Scottish people, why doesn't he call the referendum and call our bluff?
Well, as the honourable gentleman knows, we had a referendum in 2014, and we know what the agreement was between the governments and between the political parties and Civic Scotland on that. And we feel now that the priorities are, for Scotland, that we all pull together, work to bring back the economy after COVID, tackle the cost of living crisis, get in front of the issues that we believe are the priorities for the people of Scotland.
Sammy Wilson.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the legal position is now clear, but the political decision which needs to be made must also be clear, that under no circumstances should the power to hold referendum be devolved to either Northern Ireland, Scotland or Wales. Because we know that nationalist-obsessed politicians would use that power to first of all call continual referendums until they got the result they wanted. They would use it to distort the political debate, and they would use it to cover for their own governmental incompetence. So I plead with the government not to even contemplate going down that road, but I would also say the government needs to do far, far more, whether in the Northern Ireland context, or the Welsh context, or the Scottish context, to sell the benefits of the Union, which are apparent to everybody.
Well, I agree the benefits are apparent to everybody, and I think the honourable gentleman makes very good points, and the Supreme Court looked at the Scotland Act 1998 today. They opined on that, and they agree that it is a matter reserved to the Westminster Parliament.
Richard Thompson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm going to give the Secretary of State the opportunity to say something interesting here. If this is a union that is genuinely based on consent, how does the Secretary of State consider that the people of Scotland can demonstrate that they have withdrawn that consent?
Secretary of State.
Madam Deputy Speaker, he'll be disappointed with my answer, which is I refer him to the remarks I made earlier.
Alison Toulis.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. In 2014, the people of Glasgow voted for independence, and I'm sure if this is put before them again, they would do so. But we are not in 2014. And does the Secretary of State accept that democracy didn't only exist on the 18th of September 2014? Democracy is a living thing. Does he accept that the people have the right to change their mind?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'd say to the honourable lady that the people of Glasgow did vote for independence in 2014, as did 3 other local authorities in Scotland, but the other 28 out of 32 voted to remain in the United Kingdom.
Meg Hillier.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. This is an important ruling which settles the question for now, certainly on the legal matter. And does the Secretary of State think that it is now time gives us ample time to investigate and look at what else the Scottish Government is doing. This debate about the referendum has thrown up a lot of sand, and in so many areas of public service, the Scottish Government is underachieving, and it needs to be shown to be doing that.
Well, the honourable lady speaks for many people in Scotland who fear the same thing.
The more that people kind of yell out, the further down that they'll get. Alan Brown.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. We're supposed to live in a parliamentary democracy, and as such, last year the SNP won 62 out of 73 constituency seats, 85% of the seats, equivalent to a party in here winning 552 seats. There's a pro-independence majority in Holyrood, and in the last vote, a majority of voters voted for parties that support independence, support having a referendum. So if he's going to ignore a parliamentary democracy and parliamentary votes of the people, what is the route for the people of Scotland to have a referendum and have their say?
Well, I refer the honourable gentleman to the answer I gave earlier.
Carol Monaghan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. A union like a marriage should be based on equality and consent. Yeah. It's clear when a marriage has run its course how a partner can extricate themselves from it. But we're yet to find out from the Secretary of State this morning how we extricate ourselves from this union.
Well said.
Well, I believe what we have is a collaborative and constructive partnership, and I think history shows that. And I've been very clear, as I say, when there is consensus between the two governments and across all political parties and Civic Scotland, and let's be honest, polling shows that less than a third of Scots want another referendum, and as I've said earlier, and I'll repeat it, and I will repeat it again, and I will repeat it again, less than a third of the Scottish electorate voted for the Scottish National Party last year. When you face all those things and you look at priorities in polling that people show, independence is right down the rankings for people's priorities. It's not what they go to bed at night worrying about. They worry about the health system, the education system, crime, drug deaths, whether or not they can get a ferry to their island. That's what they worry about.
Chris Law.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm just reading that the many Prime Ministers previously actually defended the union. I'm surprised there's so few unions here to defend it today. But I wanted to quote John Major, who said, "No nation could be held irrevocably in a union against its will." So does the future Baron agree with that statement?
Well, and I thank you, Deputy Madam Speaker. I refer the honourable to the remarks I made earlier. We believe that that polling shows the Scottish people do not want another referendum. There is not massive dissatisfaction with the union. It is very low on their list of priorities. What they want is our two governments to start working together to deliver for their priorities. That's what they want us to do.
Karen Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. On the Public Administration Constitutional Affairs Committee, we've been meeting our parallel scrutiny committees in the devolved legislatures. 20 years on, it's clear that devolution, the parliamentary scrutiny functions and the inter-union functions are not working. They need improving. Our union was forced and often violently formed, but has for centuries successfully built through consent and citizen recognition that unity is strength. But the hallmark of this government is ignorance of our history, disrespect for those institutions across the devolution settlement, and a failure of the government to engage across all departments with the committees and bodies that have been formed in order to enhance the political union. So what he needs to take back today, Madam Deputy Speaker, from this ruling is forcing the government to now treat those institutions with the respect they deserve in order to keep our union.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I'd say to the honourable lady, we put in place the intergovernmental relations from the Dunlop review. Those recommendations were put in place.
Owen Thompson.
Madam Deputy Speaker. Now, the Secretary of State's referenced a number of times the suggestion that only a third of the electorate in Scotland voted for the SNP at the last Scottish elections. Well, in that same election, the Conservative Party secured less than 15% of the electorate to vote for them. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, I think we need a wee bit of context around this. But this all comes down to a basic question now. If not through the route of a referendum through the Scottish Parliament, what is the democratic route for Scotland to determine our own future? Countless members have asked this. Where is the answer?
Well, first of all, there were also many other votes cast for other unionist parties. And as I said, it's a matter of consensus. It is a matter of consensus between the two governments, political parties, Civic Scotland, the answer I gave earlier.
Anne McLaughlin.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the Supreme Court today did not rule that Scotland should not be independent, and it did not rule that Scotland should not be able to have a referendum. It ruled that the existing legislation written by politicians, written by unionist politicians, does not allow the Scottish Government to make that decision unless the UK Government is willing to amend it as it did in 2014. So that's the legal argument, but I want to know what the democratic argument against Scotland being able to do that is, given that in the Scottish Parliament elections, one of the 8 elections we've won since 2014, in the Scottish Parliament elections, not only did the SNP leaflets say, vote SNP and you will get for a referendum on independence, but the Tory leaflets said it, the Labour leaflets said it, and the Lib Dem leaflets said it. So what is the democratic argument against Scotland and the people of Scotland being able to just simply answer that question?
It is quite important, if we're going to be able to get everybody in, that the questions are quite short. Secretary of State.
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, I think it is important we get everyone in and they have their say. And I refer the honourable lady to the answer I gave earlier, which is less than a third of Scots voted in the electorate voted for the Scottish National Party. It is entirely a matter of consensus, and at the moment we believe that the priorities should be elsewhere. It should be on the cost of living. It should be on focusing on supporting people through inflation, the energy price cap, getting on and delivering free ports, delivering on the growth deals. Those are the things that we think the people of Scotland expect us to do.
Christine Jardine.
I welcome the ruling of the Supreme Court today, and I've sat patiently and listened to the SNP, one after one, reflect what could fairly be said to be the concerns of their political party. Unfortunately, what they don't reflect are the concerns that I get in my mailbox every day from constituents across Edinburgh West who are concerned about the cost of living, about energy prices, about the state of the NHS in Scotland, and about the teacher strikes that we're about to face. So does the Secretary of State agree with me that it's time they stop this self-indulgent obsession and address the real issues that concern the people of Scotland?
Yes, I couldn't agree with the honourable lady more.
Martin Docherty-Hughes.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I fundamentally agree with the honourable and learned member for Edinburgh South West, who was very clear that what this position is a legal position by the Supreme Court, which I think the entire Chamber welcomes, a legal opinion actually requested for by the Scottish Government. And whilst my honourable friend for Dundee West, who is no longer in their place, mentioned a Prime Minister, I wonder if the Secretary of State will agree with the former Baroness Thatcher, who said of Scotland is a nation and they have an undoubted right to national self-determination. So the question to Westminster's man in Scotland is this: does he agree with the former British Prime Minister Baroness Thatcher about Scotland's right to national self-determination? And if he doesn't, what's he doing in the Scotland office?
Madam Deputy Speaker, as I've said before, less than a third of Scots want another independence referendum, and less than a third of the Scottish electorate voted for the Scottish National Party. We just don't recognise this mandate.
Mary Black.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. All the leaflets from the Honourable Gentleman's Party at the last 8 elections said, vote Tory to stop an independence referendum. And I'm confused, Madam Deputy Speaker. because he says today that the question was settled in 2014. So why did you put out leaflets telling people to vote against a referendum? Clearly, despite being asked a number of times, the Secretary of State is unable to tell this House and the people of Scotland the route out of this union in a democratic way. He's unable to do it. So, is that why, Madam Deputy Speaker, that he's running off, he's scurrying off to the House of Lords because he can't face his own constituents at the next election? And does he not realise the people of Scotland are sovereign? They are sovereign and they are watching.
Well, to pick up on the middle point, which was the only relevant point I think the Honourable Lady made, is just quite simply the reason that leaflets in general elections say no to an independence referendum or a second independence referendum is because the Scottish National Party are obsessed with an independence referendum and nothing else.
Brady.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. In 2014, people were told in Scotland if they voted yes, the value of pensions would collapse, supermarkets would be empty of food, and energy prices would be rocketing. And they were told that if they voted no, freedom of movement would be guaranteed, the UK would have as close to federalism as possible, and the Right Honourable Member for Ruxbridge and South Ruislip would never become Prime Minister. Did the people of Scotland get what they voted for in 2014?
Well, on the basis none of the apocalypse happened, and on the basis the Scottish National Party were asking in 2014 the people of Scotland to vote to leave the European Union, yes, they got what they voted for.
Douglas Chapman.
Douglas. Thanks very much, Speaker. As of 10 a.m. this morning, we no longer have a union of equals. This union has ceased to be. It is bereft of life. It is a dead union. When will the UK Government respect the people of Scotland and their right to choose? Now is not the time to deny them.
OK, so we've resorted to quoting Monty Python. Yeah, well, that doesn't surprise me. I refer the honourable gentleman to the answer I gave earlier.
Kirsty Blackman.
Thank you very much. Madam Deputy Speaker, the Secretary of State says that in order for there to be democracy, there needs to be cross-party support. There needs to be cross-party support in order for us to have an independence referendum. But there wasn't cross-party support for us to have a Brexit referendum. There isn't cross-party support for austerity. There isn't cross-party support for demonisation of immigrants. Why did the Conservative Party get to be the arbiters of what requires democratic support and what doesn't require democratic support?
We, as the Honourable Lady knows, and I've made very clear, we believe that the people's priorities in Scotland are for the two governments to work constructively and collaboratively together in partnership.
Ronnie Cowan.
On 18 September 2014, the people of Inverclyde voted to remain in the Union by 86 votes. A few short months later, they returned me as the SNP MP on an independence manifesto. They've changed their mind. They returned me in 2017 and 2019. If you want to go again, I'll go again. But what is the route for the people of Inverclyde to express their views now in a referendum?
I refer the honourable gentleman to the answer I gave earlier.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Judges have quite clearly rejected the Scottish Government's argument that they can hold a second referendum. Legal authority lies with the UK here in this place. There have been clear attempts to manipulate devolution. With the rise in the cost of living and the increasing evils of the Putin regime, does the Minister not agree that what is needed now is a campaign and a strategy to illustrate the advantages for the Union, that we are stronger together and that we must focus on strengthening the Union, our economy and our joint prosperity?
Yes, Speaker, and I made those points in my opening remarks, and I totally agree with the honourable gentleman.
Adam Kayser.
Deputy Speaker, from the Scottish Child Payment to free prescriptions, to not really supporting the war in Iraq to free period products, Scotland has consistently chosen a different path to Westminster. And I'm reminded today of the words from the late Bashir Ahmed MSP, who said, "It doesn't matter where you come from, what matters is where we're headed together as a nation." And many Scots like me support independence on the principle that decisions for Scotland should be made in Scotland by the people of Scotland. So can the Secretary of State for Scotland clarify, does Scotland have the democratic right to choose her own path if she continues to vote for a majority of independent supporting MSPs up at Holyrood and independent supporting MPs here at Westminster?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, to her second half of her question, I've answered that point a number of times already. To the first part of your question, that is why the various policies you outlined, that is why we respect and strengthen devolution at every opportunity, whereas the Scottish National Party are the party who want to destroy devolution.
Dave Dugan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. This is nothing short of parody. I've been in here for nearly 3 years and I've never heard a minister say I refer the honourable member to the answer I gave some moments ago as many times as this. And that's because this so-called Secretary of State for Scotland has his back against the wall because he's denying democracy and democratic norms. So can I ask him, he says, and all the other Tories say, that we can't have another referendum because we don't want to foment the division that exists around the constitutional space in Scotland. Well, it exists already. So lance the boil. Let's have a referendum and find out what the people of Scotland want. Yeah.
Well, to pick up on the honourable gentleman's first point, the reason I say I've answered the question so many times before is because you're asking the same question time and time again. And it's just a little bit repetitive. And the answer is quite simple. The answer is quite simple. The route to referendum in 2014, as I've explained many times before, there was consensus between both governments. There was consensus across all the political parties, and there was consensus across Civic Scotland. We are far from in that place now.
Margaret Ferrier.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The decisions taken in Westminster dictate the impact of issues like the cost of living crisis on my constituents and all the people of Scotland. They do deserve to have their voices heard, and the landscape has changed. We can all agree since 2014. How will the UK Government work with the Scottish Government to allow the Scottish people to choose whether they wish to remain part of the Union or to be an independent country?
What we want to do, Madam Deputy Speaker, is to work with the Scottish Government to show the people of Scotland the benefits of being part of the Union, to show that we can work together on delivering on growth deals, on free ports, on the cost of living crisis, on delivering the £1.5 billion of extra funding that's coming as a result of the Chancellor's statement last week. That's what we want to do. We want to show the people of Scotland the benefits of being part of the United Kingdom. And as there seems to be, to me, looking at the numbers, an inbuilt majority for unionist parties, I think the people of Scotland are recognising that.
Brendan O'Hara.
Speaker, the Secretary of State's been struggling to answer the most basic questions from colleagues, so I have a very simple question for him. On the 13th of November 2017, at a debate in Westminster Hall, I asked him if he agreed with the preposterous suggestion of Michael Kelly, the former Lord Provost of Glasgow, that Scotland should not have another independence referendum until every person who had voted in 2014 was dead. In reply, he said, and I quote, "If I had my way, we'd wait even longer." Is that still his position today?
Now we see it.
Well, as I say, I give the same answer as I've always given. Now, is that we believe this is not the priority for the people of Scotland. We believe Scotland is stronger in the United Kingdom, benefits enormously from the United Kingdom, and we believe that the rest of the United Kingdom benefits enormously from having Scotland, whether it's on renewables, on oil and gas, on cultural matters, and many other things. Scotland is a very valued member of the United Kingdom, and that remains my position.
Stuart C. MacDonald.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, he keeps patronising us about what the priorities of the people of Scotland are. The fact is, the people of Scotland keep voting for the SNP and for an independence referendum as the means to deliver on their priorities.
Exactly.
The non-answer that he keeps referring us to is some vague nonsense about reaching consensus. In 2014, we reached consensus precisely because there was a pro-independence majority in the Scottish Parliament.
So.
Why is that not good enough now? He can dissemble and he can dodge this afternoon, but he can't do it for the weeks ahead.
As I've said on many occasions, Madam Deputy Speaker, there is not any clear evidence that a majority of Scots are voting for the SNP. Quite to the contrary, less than a third of Scots are voting for the SNP. And it's very clear in all polling that less than a third of Scots want a referendum anytime soon.
Alan Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Supreme Court's really done us all a favour by answering one legal question but leaving us with a far bigger democratic one. Now, let's have some facts. 73% of Scots want back into the European Union. 50% plus of Scots want an independent Scotland in the European Union. 22% of Scots trust the UK government to act in their interests. Does the Secretary of State accept my point that his blinkered defence of the indefensible democratic deficit will actually be the UK's undoing?
As I've said on many occasions this afternoon, the United Kingdom government believes that Scotland in the United Kingdom brings many benefits, that we as a United Kingdom are stronger together, and we believe that the majority of Scots see that too.
Peter Grant.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. If the Secretary of State is so convinced that there is a substantial anti-independence majority among today's people of Scotland, will he agree to publish in its entirety all of the polling that has been done at our expense into this matter by his Scotland office? And if he won't, can we assume that the reason his government are so desperate to avoid a referendum is because even their own private polling tells them that this time the result will be a massive yes?
Well, I can say to the honourable gentleman, the Scotland office has done no private polling. The polling that I refer to is the public opinion polling that we can all read.
Angus Brendan McNeill.
Scotland joining the Union predates the 1998 legislation, and it was the 1998 legislation which the Supreme Court judged on today. And the 1998 legislation will not stop and cannot stop Scotland being an independent country. And I'm sure the Secretary of State believes in the right of independence for Ireland, for Iceland, for Norway, for the Ukraine, for Denmark, for Lithuania, for Latvia and for many others. Does he believe the same for Scotland? And if Scotland votes for independence at an election ballot box, will he respect the democracy of that event?
Well, as I keep pointing out to the honourable members opposite, less than a third of Scots voted for the SNP at the ballot box.
Alan Doris.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and good afternoon. Madam Deputy Speaker, in 2018, this House voted to acknowledge the claim of right that Scotland's people have the right to choose their own destiny. Does the Secretary of State now deny this decision of Parliament?
We had an act of union. I mean, the claim of right. We had an act of union or the Union of the Crowns in 1603, a Union of the Parliaments in 1707. But these were all a terribly long time ago. What we believe firmly is that we have a strong partnership that's endured for over 300 years, that has delivered for all parts of the United Kingdom, and we are better together.
Thank the Secretary of State. Urgent question, Giles.